Welcome to Lecture 16, Japanese Music. So let's start by looking at Japan geographically. And as you can tell, over on the globe on the far right of this particular screen, it's a very, very long country. In fact, it's known as a stratovolcanic archipelago. Archipelago means a string of islands. Stratovolcanic means a cone-shaped volcano that ends up in layers and has frequent explosions. And this string of islands is on the eastern edge of Asia. And this is the interesting thing. It's over 1,900 miles long along the East Asia's Pacific coast. And the latitude, if you're thinking of this, as a comparison, would be from Portland, Oregon to the big island of Hawaii. So that's a tremendous amount of different climate changes that happen in Japan. There are 4 main islands: Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. And there are also nearly 4,000 smaller islands, now ranging from really little tiny atolls up to islands like Okinawa. So Japan's nearest mainland neighbors are the Siberian area in the north and Korea and China farther south. And the terrain, and this is really interesting, is mostly 73% mountains, with about 66% forests. So people live in the valleys and along the coastal areas, and it's some of the most crowded cities in the world. And in fact, Tokyo is the most populated city on the planet with right around 37 million people. So the climate varies from humid continental in the north to humid subtropical and tropical rainforests in the south. So there's quite a range. Therefore, there's a range of animals and food. And this is a fascinating culture, especially the way it developed. So we look at the 4 large islands of Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. Then there are the Ryukyu Islands. There's 55 of them. Down below the south of the Kyushu, where my cursor is, there's this chain of islands that includes the biggest one, Okinawa. And it's a fantastic chain of islands that originally had this kind of configuration. So this is an Ice Age map of Japan. And you can see where everything was pretty much connected by land masses. This is about 20,000 years ago. And so people actually began settling from the south and the north simultaneously. And it was just amazing to see how these people then fought, intermingled, intermarried, and created the culture of Japan. Some of the mythology of Japanese culture was that it was all divinely created. And of course, we know that not to be true. As a matter of fact, the early settlement probably started with the Jomon people, then the Yayoi, and then the modern Japanese. So there was this intermingling and intermarriage starting in the south with near what is now Taiwan, and then the north along the Korean peninsula. So Japan was a real melting pot about 30,000 years ago. And there were ancestors of the modern Ryukyuans, who were the Okinawans, and who were the first inhabitants of all of Japan. So it's an amazing culture that has long-standing traditions from Asia. A brief history of their music is, historically, Japanese folk music, which is what we'll look at, was strongly influenced by the music from China. You'll see that in the instruments and in the singing styles. And it's imported from China more than 1,000 years ago. And many popular Japanese musical instruments originated in China and then were adapted to meet local needs. Also, many of those instruments came from the Middle East. The rebab, for instance, then it evolves when it gets into China and evolves further when it gets into Japan. So once again, everything goes back to Mother Africa. Now, the traditions in Japanese music usually refer to this. There's 2 forms, the oldest forms, shomyayo, or Buddhist chanting, and gagaku, or theatrical court music. Shoshomyu is a ritual music sung in Buddhist ceremonies by a group of Buddhist monks. And then gagaku is the oldest of Japan's musical traditions. It includes dances and songs in a couple of styles, kigaku, which is instrumental music, and segaku, a form of vocal music. So we're going to see remnants of those in the folk music. Let's start with taiko. And taiko actually means drums. And taiko drums, which seems kind of redundant, it's like tuna fish, are many different sets of drums, not just the largest drums. However, in modern terminology in the West, we usually think of taiko as the very large drums. It's usually specifically refer to these. We usually refer to any of the various Japanese drums as wadakaiko. Now, taiko have a mythological origin in Japanese folklore, like so many myths in all of our cultures. But historical records suggest that the taiko were introduced to Japan through Korea and through Chinese cultural influence as early as the 6th century in the Common Era. And their function, which is really interesting, has varied throughout history, and this is just like African drumming, or Roman drumming, or Turkish drumming, ranging from communication, in other words, signals, military action to tell troops what to do, theatrical accompaniment, and religious ceremonies to both festivals and concert performances. So there's a great video of taiko drumming. Then we have the shamisen. And this resembles a guitar. Now, once again, we can take this all the way back to the Middle East and to Africa. And there's a small rectangular body covered with skin. You can see that on this drawing, or on this picture right here, with the pitches adjusted by tuning the pegs on the head like a guitar or a violin. The difference is it's played with a large triangular plectrum or pick. That's the white-shaped object in this picture that's used to strike the strings. So you'll see that with some very fine playing on the video. It originated from the Chinese instrument, the sanshan, and the sanshan was introduced through the Ryukyu kingdom in Okinawa in the 16th century. So this goes back to the Middle East, probably along those trade routes we talked about when we were looking at China. Then the shakuhachi is probably one of my favorite instruments. It's a flute made of bamboo that's played by blowing on one end. The end has a notch in it, and the player seals that with their lips and blows across it like you would blow across a bottle. And it's derived from the Chinese bamboo flute, and it first came to Japan from China during the 7th century. Absolutely beautiful instrument used in all kinds of ceremonies, in entertainment, but I think you'll really enjoy the sound of the shakuhachi. And then we'll notice something that's rather interesting. The shakuhachi and Buddhist monks used to do something, and they still replicate this today. You'll notice this shakuhachi player has a wicker basket over her head, and on the original, over the man's head, because originally they were just men. And the role was in what was known as Fuke. And it was a sect of Zen Buddhist monks known as Komosu, the priests of nothingness, or empty monks, as it sometimes was called. And so they used the shakuhachi as a spiritual tool and as a symbol from their detachment from the world. The Fuke wore wicker baskets, known as tengai, over their heads. So it's a rather interesting symbolic system. Even though they're in public, they're showing that their detachment from worldly goods and from society was all important to them. Then the koto, which is my favorite Japanese instrument. Historians think the koto was invented around the 5th to the 3rd century BC in China, with the 13th string version coming to Japan during what was known as the Nara period, right around 710 to 794 AD, or Common Era. And this large wooden instrument is played with picks worn on the fingers and uses a movable bridge. So all of these bridges, these little white or tan-colored wooden pieces, are movable, and one can change the pitch of the instrument. And so it's just absolutely gorgeous and used in all kinds of ceremonies. And we're going to hear one with the Cherry Blossom Festival, which is one of the biggest festivals in Japan. In the kokyu, it's a bowed lute with 3 or more rarely 4 strings and is skin covered. The body is a traditional Japanese string instrument, the only one played with a bow. And the kokyu, like the shamisen, has its origins in Okinawa and the Middle East rebab origin. So once again, it goes back to that spike fiddle idea that the Chinese adopted from the Middle East and that Japan also adopted. And then we have their singing style. And so Japanese folk songs, minyo, can be grouped and classified in many ways, but it's often convenient to think of 5 main categories. Fishermen's work songs, because this is an island culture with thousands of miles of coastline and lots of fishing. Farmers' work songs, lullabies to put children to sleep, and religious songs such as Sato Kagura, a form of Shintoist music. Very, very beautiful, almost meditative sounding songs. And then songs used for weddings, funerals, and festivals, matsuri, especially oban, children's songs, which are known as warabe uta. So these are just fantastic styles of singing. You can hear the Chinese influence. You can hear the uniqueness of the Japanese culture as those songs evolved to fit their own culture. The assignment is very familiar to you all. Watch all the videos, take the quiz on Google Docs, and I'll see you in class. Thank you.